What kind of king drives his own people to betray him, sign a rebellion, and then literally invite a foreign prince to take over the kingdom? That's not fiction, it's the story of King John of England. Most people know him as the villain in Robin Hood or the king who signed Magna Carta. But the real story is far darker. This was a ruler so distrusted, so paranoid, and so brutally incompetent that England nearly collapsed under his reign. But was he really the monster history paints him to be? Or was John just the wrong man at the worst possible time? Let's pull back the curtain on one of the most chaotic reigns in British history. John wasn't supposed to be king. In fact, his own father, King Henry II, nicknamed him Lackland because he was the youngest of 5 sons and likely to inherit nothing. His older brothers got the power, the lands, and the glory. Richard the Lionheart, his immediate predecessor, became a national hero, off fighting in the Crusades and carving his name into legend. Meanwhile, John stayed behind, plotting. While Richard was imprisoned overseas, John didn't lift a finger to help. Worse, he allegedly tried to buy off the captors to keep his brother locked up. When Richard returned, he was furious, but didn't execute John. Why? Because he had no children. John was still next in line, even if he was a snake. When Richard died in 1199, John was crowned king. But while England accepted him, things weren't so smooth across the Channel. Much of England's wealth came from its French territories, places like Normandy, Anjou, and Aquitaine. And the laws in those regions didn't favor John. Instead, they backed a teenage rival, Arthur of Brittany, John's own nephew. In the eyes of many, Arthur was the rightful heir, and suddenly, John's crown was under threat. To secure his grip on power, John needed allies, and quickly. So he did what many medieval kings did, used marriage as a weapon. The problem? He was already married. That was inconvenient, so he had the marriage annulled. His excuse? They were cousins and hadn't gotten the Pope's blessing. With that out of the way, John married a 12-year-old French heiress named Isabella of Angoulême. She came with valuable lands that could strengthen his claim in France. There was just one issue: she was already engaged. Her former fiancé wasn't some nobody. He was a powerful noble, and he didn't take the insult lightly. He ran straight to King Philip II of France, who summoned John to court to explain himself. Technically, as a duke holding land in France, John was Philip's vassal. And technically, vassals had to obey the king's orders. But John didn't show up. In fact, he ignored Philip completely. That insult turned into an official declaration. John's lands in France were forfeit, and just like that, war erupted. But John didn't just have external enemies. His actions were alienating his own allies. His military campaigns were a mess. He publicly insulted noble commanders, ignored advice, and grew increasingly suspicious of those around him. Then, something happened that changed everything. Arthur of Brittany, his young rival, was captured. Not long after, Arthur disappeared. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some whispered that John had killed the boy himself, possibly with his own hands during a drunken rage. Whether true or not, the damage was done. Nobles who once supported him now turned away in horror. John's marriage to young Isabella might have gained him strategic land, but it came at an enormous cost. Not only had he broken off a marriage without the Pope's approval, he had stolen a nobleman's bride and angered a powerful political network. Philip II of France now had the perfect excuse to strip John of his French holdings. The King of France summoned John to his royal court, a feudal command John was expected to obey, but in typical fashion, John refused. To the French, this wasn't just arrogance, it was treason. And Philip wasted no time declaring John's lands in France forfeit. Within months, John's political gamble unraveled. One by one, his territories slipped from his control. His barons in Normandy and Anjou began abandoning him, either out of fear, frustration, or sheer disbelief at his behavior. By 1204, John had lost almost all his continental possessions, lands his father and brother had fought hard to acquire. For a medieval king, this was humiliation on a royal scale. Kings were expected to win wars, not surrender empires. And for a monarch already accused of cowardice and betrayal, the loss confirmed his reputation. John wasn't just unpopular, he was a failure. The final nail in this coffin came with the disappearance of Arthur of Brittany. The boy had been captured in battle and imprisoned at Chateau de Falaise. But then, he vanished. The official story was vague. No witnesses, no explanation, just silence. But whispers traveled faster than truth. Some said John had murdered Arthur in a fit of rage. Others claimed he had the boy drowned in the Seine. The worst rumor? That John had personally stabbed his nephew, then dumped the body into the river. Whatever the truth, one thing was certain: John's own nobles no longer trusted him. In a world where family bloodlines meant everything, killing a child heir, especially your own kin, crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Nobles began to question John's sanity. Was he just ruthless, or was he spiraling out of control? Many began quietly pulling support, distancing themselves from the king who now reeked of blood and failure. Even among his few loyalists, fear replaced loyalty. After all, if he could do that to Arthur, what would stop him from turning on them? Back in England, John was desperate to recover what he'd lost, but war is expensive, and his kingdom was broke. Richard's crusade had drained the treasury, and John had no patience for rebuilding slowly. So he did what tyrants do when they need quick cash. He bled his people dry. Taxes skyrocketed. Fines became absurd. Nobles were charged thousands just to inherit family land or remarry after a spouse's death. If they couldn't pay, John simply seized their estates. No debate, no warning. Even those who had remained loyal weren't spared. John fined his allies for trivial offenses, accused them of imaginary crimes, and punished them without trial. He micromanaged every aspect of government, paranoid that any official left unchecked would rise against him. And he wasn't wrong. He had made too many enemies, burned too many bridges. But John's worst mistake wasn't how much money he took, it was how he alienated the church. In 1208, he defied the Pope over the appointment of the Archbishop of Canterbury. The Pope responded by placing England under interdict. That meant no weddings, no baptisms, no burials, nothing. Church services stopped. Bells fell silent. For the deeply religious people of medieval England, this wasn't just an inconvenience, it was terrifying. And when John still refused to cooperate, the Pope went further. In 1209, he excommunicated the king entirely. For 3 years, John was not only at war with France and his own barons, but with God himself. By 1214, John had pushed everyone to the brink. His obsession with reclaiming lost lands in France drove him to launch another costly campaign. But his barons, fed up with endless taxes and hollow victories, refused to fight. Without their support, the campaign collapsed. John returned home humiliated once again, but this time, he found England ready to explode. The barons had had enough. They marched on London, took control of the city, and forced John into negotiations. The result was a document that would change history, the Magna Carta. Signed in June 1215, it was a bold attempt to put the king in check. It demanded fair taxation, protection from unlawful imprisonment, and recognition that even the king must follow the law. While its immediate impact was limited and mostly protected elite landowners, the idea behind it was revolutionary, but John never planned to honor it. The moment the barons lowered their swords and left London, John sent urgent messages to the Pope. He claimed he had been forced into signing under duress. The Pope, who had recently made peace with John in exchange for hefty payments and promises of loyalty, sided with the king. He annulled the Magna Carta and declared it void. Civil war returned within weeks. This time, the rebellion was different. The barons didn't just want to restrain John, they wanted to replace him. And they knew just the man for the job, Prince Louis of France, son of King Philip II. It was a desperate move, but one they felt justified in making. John, after all, had already betrayed the country, the church, and every noble who had ever served him. Louis landed in England with thousands of troops and quickly gained control over much of the southeast, including London. Scottish forces invaded from the north. Rebels opened their gates. In a matter of months, the kingdom was on the verge of collapse. John, meanwhile, was on the run. His health was failing, his support base was shrinking, and worst of all, his reputation was beyond repair. He had become the embodiment of everything a king should not be. Cruel, cowardly, paranoid, and reckless. Even those who remained loyal were doing so out of fear or self-preservation, not respect. In one final misstep, John attempted to flee across the Wash, a tidal estuary on the east coast of England. During a retreat, he misjudged the tides. His treasure, including the crown jewels, was swallowed by the sea. It was a metaphor for his reign, reckless, costly, and ultimately sunk. By late 1216, John was dying. Some said it was dysentery. Others whispered about poison. Whatever the cause, he knew the end was near. With his enemies closing in, he named his 9-year-old son, Henry, as heir. When John finally died, there was no grief, only relief. The rebellion lost its fire. Many nobles had no real quarrel with the boy king, and a child could be controlled in a way John never could. Prince Louis was pushed back. The barons accepted a softened version of the Magna Carta, and England stabilized. And just like that, the nightmare of John's reign ended. Not with a great final battle or noble sacrifice, but with a whimper. His death solved what his rule could not: peace. King John didn't start with a strong hand, but he played it like a madman. He inherited a kingdom battered by war, strapped for cash, and tangled in politics. But instead of rising to the challenge, he alienated his allies, bullied his enemies, and ruled through fear, not respect. He turned barons into rebels, allies into traitors, and priests into enemies. Yet ironically, his disastrous reign produced something lasting: the Magna Carta, a document that, over time, evolved into the foundation for modern democracy and human rights. So, was King John the worst king in English history? Maybe. He was cruel, paranoid, and power-hungry. But worst of all, he was incompetent. And when a king loses his kingdom, his nobles, and his own crown jewels, history doesn't forgive, it remembers.